And everything that China's doing would make perfect sense. So here's from the LA Times, 2016.
Yeah, boy.
Yeah, boy. Someone says, check out this channel. It's based. I love Brian Berletic, this channel. This is a fantastic channel that I watch quite a bit.
In China, rise of Salafism fosters suspicion and division among Muslims. And what they're talking about in this article is Saudi state-sponsored Wahhabism or Salafism. It's a politically motivated perversion of Islam. It is radical, it is extremist, and what they use this for is to transform regions of Muslim-majority areas into kind of a political weapon directed by Saudi Arabia, who controls Salafism. And what they were doing was dumping millions of dollars into Xinjiang, building up schools to basically brainwash Uyghur Muslims so that they abandon the version of Islam that they practiced for generations and adopted this extremist strain sponsored and controlled by Saudi Arabia. And this is...
Yes, and I've been trying to draw attention to this for a while. There's a fantastic article that I found on Consortium News inside the U.S.-backed World Uyghur Congress. So basically, you have this large network called the World Uyghur Congress, which is attached to the U.S. State Department, which, among other things, is funding and supporting and backing sort of extremist separatist groups in that region, not just in Xinjiang, China, but in Afghanistan and elsewhere. Including the ETIM, the East Turkestan Islamic Movement, who also received funding and arms from Osama bin Laden's Mujahideen, who, of course, were famously armed and funded by the United States in Afghanistan, when Afghanistan was taking a turn towards having a left-wing sort of Marxist democratic government. Yeah, this is what the U.S. is trying to do in Xinjiang, while this World Uyghur Congress is also, creating all this propaganda about China, all this these accusations of genocide towards China, when in reality what China's been doing are these anti-terrorism efforts to try and stop all the radicalization that has been happening largely because of the U.S. funding and support for extremist groups in this region. So then when China, goes to try and stop the U.S.-backed and U.S.-supported rise in extremism, the U.S. turns around and accuses them of genocide, right? Even though there were attacks that happened in China, like the Urumqi riots, which killed over 140 people, and people were being beheaded in the streets by these groups supported by the United States, So it's just disgusting the way the U.S. accuses China of committing human rights abuses as they're arming and backing separatist groups to try and destabilize China.
It's what they did in Afghanistan to expel the Soviets. It's what they did in Syria to try to overthrow the Syrian government, the Saudis with U.S. backing. And then this is exactly what they were doing in Xinjiang. And so this is what China has been trying to undo for years now. That's what this is all actually really about. And so when they talk about Islam, the practice of Islam in Xinjiang, they're actually talking about China uprooting Salafism, Saudi state-sponsored Salafism, which was the real cultural genocide. Salafism, sponsored by Saudi Arabia, was trying to overwrite the indigenous practice of Islam.
Yeah, no kidding. The U.S. accuses China of cultural genocide, right? Which, cultures change and morph all the time. So the U.S. accusing them of that is obviously just a way to accuse China of genocide, right? But in reality, the U.S. is taking these majority peaceful Islamic communities and propagating the spreading of extremism, right? So if there's anyone meddling with and changing the culture and making the culture more violent, it's the U.S. State Department.
Practiced by Uyghurs for generations. That was the original actual cultural genocide. China was reversing it. And so let's continue with this New York Times article. So that's their excuse, but that's not true. And again, no evidence at all to substantiate any of this, except they just trust that you think the New York Times is credible. Many Uyghurs and Kazakhs complain they have been left out of growth and face discrimination in hiring, along with stifling restrictions on their practice of Islam. So there you go. They're not gonna qualify what they mean by that. But as a matter of fact, the only restrictions on a practice of Islam in China is if you're practicing Saudi state-sponsored Wahhabism, Salafism. It is.
What do you know? And what would happen in the U.S. if you were practicing Islamic extremism? There was a huge, crackdown on Islamic people by police around 9/11 and during the War on Terror, just because of bigotry towards Muslim people, because of the U.S. propaganda efforts to create support for the War on Terror. Among other factors, of course. Imagine if, or just think of the reaction there is when there are extremist attacks in the West, right? People freak out and immediately want to start cracking down on Muslim people. But they're, yet these same Americans care so deeply about the freedom of Muslims in China. Like, give me a break. The U.S. has spent the last 20 years bombing Muslim-majority countries, last 30 years, last 40 years. And now you're supposed to think that they care about Muslims in Xinjiang, China, the place where they've been backing the most extremist right-wing groups for the last 20-some years, 40 years. It's crazy that people fell for this again. It really is.
Extremist. It is radical. It spurs people to go out and kill people. And when these people were brainwashed into Saudi-sponsored Salafism, it wasn't because they were upset with Beijing's policies. They were just extremists in general. They would go out and target anybody they thought were practicing an impure version of Islam or people.
Crazy. Read this article. It's a good one. Neat to see you here from TikTok. Appreciate more radical voices, but I'ma head out. See you again. Yes, exactly. China isn't against Islam. They're defending themselves from infiltrating jihadists. Yes. And I'm friends with Muslim people in TikTok who I communicate with, and they're free to practice their religion. Send videos of themselves practicing their religion. It isn't just Salafism that is the problem in Xinjiang, but also Turkish-sponsored pan-Turkic fascism, something that is commonly overlooked. Oh, very good point. They are doing the same across Central Asia and Iran. The Grey Wolves are both active in Xinjiang, China, Azerbaijan, and northern Iran. These fascists act as a vehicle for NATO interference. That is very good to know, and I should probably look more into that. Very interesting, but yeah, I know that's why the U.S. keeps such a close relationship with Turkey and Erdogan, because Turkey kind of serves as not a complete U.S. proxy in the region, but in some ways. So, yes, the British now in Oman, that feudal regime of Saudi United Emirates, the proud Republic of USA, doesn't think the citizens of Middle East deserve anything other than the tyranny of kings. That is true. The U.S. has been trying to keep the Middle East and all countries in that region in a basically feudal state for forever. So, solidarity with them, of course.